The longevity of Shakespeare's text is partially due to the variety of interpretations that the text can have. With these two modern interpretations of Macbeth, we're shown how both a weak man and a strong man can fall from grace. Justin Kurzel's Macbeth starts out very bleak, with the death of Macbeth and Lady Macbeth's child, followed by a battle fought in part by child soldiers. This sets up the premise that Macbeth and Lady Macbeth's actions in this film are being heavily influenced by the effects of PTSD.
You know, when I came and I arrived on the first day of rehearsals, and he was like, "This is a guy who's suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder." And I was like, and then you realize that actually Shakespeare wrote about it. You know, that's how ahead of his time he was.
This is opposed to Joel Coen's Macbeth, which opens up the same way the play opens, with the monologue from the witches followed by a soldier and Ross reporting the results of the battle to the king. Choosing to stick to the play and not show the battle or the death of Macbeth's child takes away from Macbeth's prowess in battle, as well as lays the groundwork for Lady Macbeth to come from the perspective of frustration rather than a position of lament. While being introduced to the initial premise of the film, we are confronted with the obvious difference in aesthetic choices, one being the aspect ratio, the other being the choice of color, or lack of it. The 4:3 aspect ratio in the tragedy of Macbeth brings your attention to the actors in frame. Your peripheral vision isn't looking for someone to enter the frame. The audience is locked onto the actor delivering the dialogue, while the black and white color scheme gives you the sensation that the story is happening in a vacuum. The 2015 version of Macbeth is completely the opposite. It uses multiple color schemes to give the film version of this play a sense of realism and surrealism depending on what's happening in the frame. Michael Fassbender's version of Macbeth is a warrior. He is capable but exposed to the harshest of battle conditions. The film lays out that the witches in the film may or may not be literally real, that they could be figments of Macbeth's imagination. Banquo is the only other character that sees them, but he has suffered the same harsh battle conditions and resulting PTSD that Macbeth has. The film doesn't show Lady Macbeth reading the letter that Macbeth sends in the play. She says the words from the letter out loud to herself, which gives her the illusion that the assassination of Duncan is solely her brainchild. When Macbeth returns to his wife, she proposes the idea to him while she's taking off his armor. Because of the loss of the child in the beginning of the film, they have no living heir. Every time Macbeth risks his life in battle, it puts Lady Macbeth's position as wife of a noble in jeopardy. Macbeth is a good soldier that performs well. Duncan needs good soldiers to keep his country in control. Duncan risked the lives of child soldiers, he'll surely continue to risk Macbeth's. The assassination of Duncan would get Macbeth off the battlefield. In the tragedy of Macbeth, the film's adaptation is closely connected to the play. Macbeth's interaction with the witches are seen as literal. At the time of Shakespeare writing the play, witches were believed to be real beings that delved in evil. Macbeth's eagerness to talk to the witches and believe their prophecies shows his willingness to delve in evil himself in exchange for personal gain. When Lady Macbeth is seen reading the letter, it places initial thoughts of personal ambition on Macbeth, since he thought the witch's prophecy important enough that he needed to tell his wife. Denzel Washington's Macbeth isn't perceived as a hardened warrior like Fassbender's. He's an opportunist that is usually risk-averse. This explains why Washington chose to react shocked when Lady Macbeth mentions the plan to assassinate Duncan to him when they reunite. She talks down to him and explains that she can take care of everything as long as he can do the deed of killing him. This leaves the audience open to infer that maybe Macbeth is the reason they can't produce a child, and now that they are in their older age, Lady Macbeth wants to take matters into her own hands. Macbeth's monologue before he talks to Lady Macbeth for the second time is performed in vastly different ways. Denzel Washington puts an emphasis on the words that make him seem concerned about his reputation and what killing Duncan might do for his karma, as well as displaying his fear about getting caught. Fassbender's performance is a display of the anxiety that comes before the act. He performs it as if the act of assassinating Duncan is unavoidable, the same way a battle is, and his fear is that this is the only way to get himself off the battlefield. When Macbeth sees his wife again, he tries to get out of the plan. In the tragedy of Macbeth, Macbeth is scolded, called out for being weak by his wife, inferred that she has had to do this before. She yells at him to be a man. In Macbeth, Lady Macbeth sees her husband cracking under the pressure and sleeps with him to make him feel more masculine and revive his manhood. This takes place in the chapel, which adds a disturbing element to the act. These two films construct their separate premises that set up Macbeth's dagger monologue perfectly. Again, the same words are interpreted differently based on the performance that happens on screen. Fassbender's version sees the child soldier from the opening battle. The child comes to him and extends the dagger towards him, symbolizing that this is Macbeth's way out. Take the dagger or end up being dead like this child soldier. Denzel's version sees the dagger take the form of a handle on the door that leads to Duncan's room. This is symbolic of an opportunity Macbeth has. The opportunity to take the throne and become something he's never been. Powerful. Several creative liberties are taken in the 2015 version of Macbeth, one of which follows the murder of King Duncan. Macbeth is directly confronted by Malcolm. He repeats the line from his first encounter with the witches. Live you, or are you aught that man may question? This phrase most likely doesn't mean what it literally means in the first act. It's more of a turn of phrase by Macbeth, meaning, are you going to disappear like something that isn't real, or am I going to have to deal with you as well? In Joel Coen's film, Macbeth is immediately taunted by the fear and anxiety of getting caught and has an almost instant regret. Following the end of the play's second act, Banquo performs a monologue. Kurtzill's version has him speak the words to his child, implying that if the prophecy becomes true, like it did for Macbeth, it could lead to a better life for his son. In the 2021 version, Banquo is lit by a spotlight and speaks directly into the camera at the audience, like it would be performed on stage. This implies that the monologue is his inner thoughts and not something that the character actually said out loud. Once we arrive at the murder of Banquo, we see another creative liberty taken by the film titled Macbeth. The filmmakers chose to omit the discussion of Banquo's assassination with the murderers. In this version, he simply commands them, because Macbeth is confident in his position as king and is used to commanding men from his war experience. In the tragedy of Macbeth, Macbeth is seen pleading with his murderers, trying to convince them that Banquo deserves to be killed. He does not command them. Although he is king, he is not confident in his position and feels ill-equipped to command. This brings us to possibly the biggest creative choice made by Joel Coen in regards to the Ross character. The Ross character acts as a messenger in the play. Coen ends up treating him similarly to the way Littlefinger is treated in Game of Thrones. He is a messenger, but possibly an untrustworthy one. He has a brief interaction with the witches and conceals himself as the third murderer from the play. After Banquo is murdered, he takes his son Fleance and keeps him safe, motivated to put Fleance in his debt and fulfill the prophecy, thus securing his own position of safety close to the king. This also represents the fact that since Macbeth is a weak leader, he is intimidated by everyone. Therefore, he sees everyone as potential enemies. This causes him to miss the enemy plotting against him right under his nose. We see the film's perspective come to conclusion when Macbeth fights Macduff. The colored film changes its color to a monochromatic orange, as Burnham Wood is burned and the ash blows toward Dunsinane Hill. That is symbolic of the hell that Macbeth has created. Because he still has his warrior mentality, he leaves the safety of his castle and the armor and war paint from the opening battle. He fights ferociously but is ultimately killed when he won't surrender to Malcolm. Better to rule in hell than to serve in heaven. In the black and white version, Macbeth stays in the safety of his castle as long as he can. He fights Macduff with the false confidence he has built up, but when the crown is knocked from his head, he is killed while retrieving it. He goes for it because to him, the crown makes the king instead of the king making the crown.